The crazy part is, I didn't even see her coming at first. One second, I was watching my delivery bot glide down a quiet sidewalk like it had done 100 times before, and the next, some woman in a lemon-colored tennis visor was lifting a landscaping maul over her head like she was about to execute a medieval prisoner. I remember leaning toward my monitor, squinting, thinking, no way. No normal person does that. No sane grown adult sees a machine the size of a carry-on suitcase and decides, yep, today I'm going to kill it with a hammer. But that's exactly what she did. One swing, then another, then a third for good measure. And just like that, 4 years of my work was lying in pieces on a gated community sidewalk while she stood there breathing hard. Like she'd just saved America. My name's Ethan Cole, and about a year ago, I was the guy everybody underestimated. I was the quiet robotics engineer renting the smallest house on a street full of people who had opinions about hedge height, mailbox fonts, and what counted as acceptable neighborhood aesthetics. I worked out of a converted guest room with folding tables, spare parts, and enough coffee to qualify as a controlled substance. Most of my neighbors thought I was weird. The Homeowners Association definitely did. And their queen bee, a woman named Valerie Sloan, had pretty much made me her hobby. Valerie was one of those people who walked like she expected theme music to follow her around. Perfect white sneakers, giant sunglasses, clipboard always tucked under one arm like a weapon she'd been licensed to carry. She had that polished, expensive look some people wear when they need the whole world to know they've never once been told no. Every conversation with her started the same way too. Not hello, not how are you, just some variation of, Mr. Cole, I need a word. That neighborhood had rules for everything. Trash cans couldn't be visible before 6 p.m. Wind chimes were apparently acoustically disruptive. My garage door being open too long once triggered a written notice. I'm not exaggerating. I got an email titled Resident Compliance Reminder because I'd left the garage open while unloading equipment. So when I started field testing a compact autonomous service unit for the university lab I worked with, Valerie decided that was the final sign civilization was collapsing. The robot's name was Atlas 9, though I called him Patch. He wasn't military, he wasn't surveillance, and he definitely wasn't dangerous. He was designed for sidewalk-scale logistics and environmental sampling. Basically a smart rolling platform that could transport medical supplies, collect local air quality data, and navigate pedestrian areas without becoming a nuisance. He was the most advanced thing I had ever helped build, and if everything went right, he'd be the prototype that finally pushed me from talented guy behind the scenes to lead systems architect on a funded expansion project. And yeah, I loved that machine more than was probably healthy. The morning everything blew up started out beautiful. Patch was running a route through Briar Glen Estates, the neighborhood where I lived, gathering particulate readings and testing his upgraded obstacle avoidance model. I had a live video feed up on my main screen, telemetry scrolling clean in green columns, battery stable, motor stable, GPS steady. It was one of those rare moments when engineering feels almost magical, all the little failures and late nights disappearing into this smooth, elegant proof that the thing actually works. I actually smiled and said out loud, "Look at you, buddy. Flawless." Then Patch rounded the corner by Willow Bend Park, and there she was. Valerie Sloan, power walking straight toward him. At first, I figured she was going to do what she always did, wave her arms, take pictures, threaten to call somebody who didn't care. Then I noticed what she was carrying. Long wooden handle, black steel head, not a gardening tool, not a shovel, a demolition maul. My stomach dropped so fast it was like missing a stair in the dark. No, no, no. Valerie, don't you dare. I was already out of my chair, grabbing my keys, when the feed jolted. She stepped in front of Patch, planted her feet, and yelled something I couldn't make out. Patch paused, because unlike Valerie, he actually followed safety protocols. Then she raised that maul and brought it down with both hands. The sound came through my speakers half a second before the signal died. A violent metallic crack, a burst of static, and then a flat red warning line across my dashboard. Connection lost. I don't remember locking my front door. I don't remember the run there. I just remember turning onto Willow Bend and seeing him, Patch, flipped on his side, shell split open, sensor mask snapped clean off. One was still twitching like it didn't understand it was over. And standing over him was Valerie, face flushed, breathing hard, looking proud of herself. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and just stared. "What did you do?" She looked at me like I was the unreasonable one. "I handled a problem." "A problem?" My voice cracked so hard I barely recognized it. "That is university property. That's a research prototype." She gave this little laugh, the kind people do when they've mistaken ignorance for confidence. It was an unauthorized machine roaming private community walkways. It had cameras, it was recording homes, and Mrs. Dorsey says it frightened her be shown. I looked down at Patch, then back at her. "You smashed a six-figure prototype because somebody's dog got nervous?" "It was not approved by the association," she said, tapping them all against her sneaker like a judge setting down a gavel. "And frankly, Ethan, people are tired of your experiments. There are moments when anger gets so big it turns cold. That's what happened to me. Everything in me went still." I pulled out my phone and called Professor Lena Mercer, the director of applied robotics at North Bay Tech. The person who had backed me when half the department still saw me as good, but not leadership material. She picked up on the second ring. "Ethan?" "Valerie Sloan just destroyed Patch." Silence. "Then, say that again," I told her. Quick, flat, every word clipped by disbelief. When I finished, Professor Mercer didn't gasp. She didn't ramble. Her voice just changed. It went from warm and human to a level of calm that scared me worse than yelling would have. "Do not leave the scene," she said. "Do not let her remove anything. Do not touch the unit. I'm calling University Council now." I blinked. "Council?" "Ethan, Atlas 9 is tied to a state innovation grant and a private healthcare deployment contract. This is destruction of protected research property. If she did this intentionally, she may have just detonated her own financial life." I looked up at Valerie, who was now talking to two neighbors like she'd just put down a rabid coyote. Professor Mercer kept going. "Stay there. Take photos. Record everything she says. Legal is on the way." I almost laughed from sheer disbelief. "On the way? Ethan, this isn't a broken lawn ornament. Stay put." Then she hung up. Valerie crossed her arms. "Well, did your little science club cry?" I stared at her. "You really have no idea what you just did." She smirked. "What I did was protect this neighborhood." And here's the part that still feels unreal, even now. About 5 minutes later, a black town car rolled up to the curb. Not a police cruiser. Not a campus van. A black town car with tinted windows and the kind of quiet door close that says money. Out stepped a tall man in a dark suit and a woman carrying a leather folio. Both of them moving with the unhurried confidence of people who never rush because everybody else eventually has to catch up to them. The man walked straight to Valerie. "Mrs. Sloan." She blinked. "Yes. My name is Daniel Reeves. This is Ms. Nora Bell. We represent North Bay Institute of Technology." You could actually see the blood leave her face. "This is absurd," she said. "This is an HOA matter." Nora opened the folio and handed Valerie a stack of papers. "No, ma'am. It is now a civil matter, and potentially a criminal one. You are hereby placed on notice to preserve all evidence related to the destruction of Autonomous Research Unit Atlas 9, including the impact tool presently in your possession. You are further instructed not to contact lab personnel, interfere with university property, or destroy any related communications, digital or otherwise." Valerie looked down at the documents like they were written in fire. "What is this?" Daniel's tone stayed perfectly even. "Preliminary notice of claim. Replacement cost, research disruption, contract delay exposure, and associated damages are still being calculated." She swallowed. "It's a rolling box with a camera." "No," he said, finally looking her dead in the eye. "It is a custom research asset tied to active institutional funding and pre-commercial deployment. You chose to destroy it in public, on video." That got her attention. Video. I almost smiled. Patch had onboard cameras, redundant telemetry logs, and a hardened event recorder. Valerie's grip on the mall loosened. By then the neighbors were coming out for real. Drifting closer in that suburban way where everybody pretends not to stare while staring with Olympic commitment. Word was spreading fast. Valerie kept trying to talk over the moment, trying to reclaim it. This machine was invading resident privacy. Nora didn't blink. "You are welcome to make that argument through counsel." Then the police showed up. Officer Ramirez and Officer Kent stepped out with the usual expressions cops were when they think they're about to mediate another petty neighborhood feud. But that changed fast once they saw the wreckage, the lawyers, the papers, and Valerie still holding the weapon. Officer Ramirez looked at me. "Sir, what happened?" Before I could answer, Valerie jumped in. "That device was trespassing and recording residents without consent. I neutralized it." Officer Kent turned slowly. "You neutralized it?" Daniel stepped forward. "Officers, our client will be filing a formal complaint for intentional destruction of protected research property. We also believe the onboard recorder captured the incident." That did it. The whole vibe changed. Suddenly nobody was chuckling. Nobody was treating it like a weird HOA spat. Ramirez asked Valerie to set them all down. Crime scene photos started. The area got taped off. And while all that was happening, I just stood there staring at what was left of Patch, thinking about every night I'd spent debugging his navigation stack, while people like Valerie assumed I was just playing with toys. The next week was brutal. The lab recovered what they could. Not much. The outer chassis was done, the sensor tower was shattered, the compute stack had taken a direct impact, and the storage module, the one holding weeks of field validation data, was corrupted beyond repair. We didn't just lose a machine. We lost route learning logs, environmental models, hardware tuning data. Months of work that can't simply be recreated by buying replacement parts. Professor Mercer was furious, but not loud about it. Loud anger burns fast. Hers just stayed hot. I was there when legal built the damages timeline. Hardware costs, contractor fabrication, calibration time, insurance exposure, missed milestone penalties, delay risk to the healthcare pilot. It added up so fast it made my head spin. Meanwhile, Valerie did what people like Valerie always do when consequences arrive. She reframed herself as the victim. She called an emergency HOA meeting and apparently told everyone she had acted in defense of the neighborhood. She claimed Patch was aggressively patrolling. She said it was surveillance adjacent. She even argued that as association president, she had brought authority to address mechanized nuisances. That worked for about 48 hours. Then came discovery. Patch's event recorder survived just enough to recover the final sequence. Grainy, incomplete, but clear where it counted. You could see Valerie step into frame. You could hear her voice say, "You don't belong here." Then, louder, "Let's see you roll through my neighborhood now." Then the first swing. That recording ended whatever fantasy she'd built for herself. By the time depositions started, the HOA board was in full panic mode. Their insurer was suddenly using phrases like intentional misconduct, coverage reservation, and exclusion risk, which is corporate language for, "This may be your problem, not ours." I had to testify, and I won't lie, part of me hated it. I'm good with systems, not stages. But there's something strange that happens when you stop trying to sound impressive and just tell the truth. People listen differently. So I did. I described building Patch. I described what the project meant. I described standing in the street looking at broken components that had taken years to become real. And when Valerie's attorney tried to frame it like she had simply acted out of concern, I looked right at him and said, "Concern doesn't look like a two-handed overhead strike." Nobody had a follow-up for that. Valerie's deposition went worse. She contradicted herself 3 times in 20 minutes. First, Patch was threatening. Then it was suspicious. Then it was motionless when she hit it, which obviously raised the question of why she needed to hit it at all. At one point she actually said, "I was sending a message." Yeah, bad sentence. Very bad sentence. After that, the HOA quietly removed her as president. Then they stripped every committee title she had. Then they issued this stiff, bloodless public statement about regrettable personal actions not reflective of community values, which is exactly the kind of apology organizations make when they're hoping a judge sees it later. As for me, I wish I could say the whole thing felt triumphant right away. It didn't. Winning slowly doesn't feel like winning. It feels like paperwork, exhaustion, and trying not to let bitterness rot you from the inside. I still had a dead prototype. I still had lost work. I still had this voice in my head asking whether all the people who dismissed me before were only respecting me now because lawyers got involved. But then something changed. The university approved a rebuild, not just a replacement, a redesign. Stronger shell, better data redundancy, automatic uplink mirroring, reinforced camera housing. Internal joke around the lab was that the new model was Valerie rated. We called him Atlas, 10 officially. I still called him Patch. The first day we sent the rebuilt unit out for public route testing, I walked alongside him for the first block. Same neighborhood, same stretch of sidewalk, same neat lawns and judgmental windows. Only this time people came outside smiling. A retired couple clapped. A teenager asked if it could carry groceries. Somebody left a tiny handwritten sign by the curb that said science wins. And Valerie? Her house went up for sale 2 months later. I saw her once after that. She was loading boxes into an SUV, moving fast, eyes down, no visor, no clipboard, no performance. Just another person who had finally discovered that power feels permanent only until it hits something bigger than ego. Evidence, consequences. The truth, whatever you want to call it. She glanced at Atlas, 10 as he rolled past, and then looked away so fast it almost made me laugh. Almost. Because here's the part one still go back and forth on. Was justice served because she paid for what she did, or because everyone finally saw who she had been all along? Those aren't always the same thing. Plenty of people destroy things they don't understand, ideas, people, work, confidence, and never face any real fallout. They just move on to the next target. Valerie happened to swing at something connected to contracts, cameras, and attorneys. If she'd done the same thing to a person with less backing, less documentation, less institutional weight, would anyone have cared? That part bothers me more than I expected. So yeah, Patch came back stronger. I got the promotion. The project survived. Valerie lost her throne. On paper, that sounds like a satisfying ending. But I'm not sure the real story is about revenge. I think it's about what happens when somebody mistakes quiet for weak. When they look at a person who keeps their head down and assume there's nothing behind the silence but softness. Sometimes there's grief back there. Sometimes patience. Sometimes a whole engine they never bothered to notice until it starts moving. And sometimes there's a record button already running. If you made it this far, tell me what you think. Was Valerie just a control freak who finally got what was coming to her? Or did the whole thing spiral bigger than it should have? Have you ever seen somebody abuse a tiny little bit of power because they thought no one would push back? Drop it in the comments, because I swear, the older I get, the more I realize most people's strongest opinions about justice only show up when the victim has enough leverage to demand it.